We appreciate that you are joining us in the middle of your Monday afternoon. We have pertinent information to offer you today. If there are any questions that you have as we go through this, feel free to send those as a text message to 504-470-0740. We have joining us today Mayor Cantrell, Dr. Jennifer Avegno, Dr. Eric Griggs, Doc Griggs, and C.J. Marbley, who will be sharing his perspective as an RN and his own vaccine story. So with that, Dr. Avegno, let's go forward just one slide and let's hear from our illustrious mayor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Valerie. And thank you all for just spending your afternoon with us for 1 hour to discuss something very important, and that is the vaccine, getting the vaccination. But first, I want to wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season. As we said last week, we know the holidays will look different this year because we are living in different times, but we know that we can be flexible and keep the spirit of the holiday season alive. While the data has showed we do not have to increase restrictions, we still need to stay the course and not let our guards down at all. The good news is that the vaccine has started to arrive in the city of New Orleans. And what I also hope you know and feel is good news is that here in our city, we've been able to stay the course. We've been able to flatten the curve, even twice, going into a third period. We've been able to follow the guidelines at place. And in spite of, and let me tell you as your mayor, you know that I've been beat down on every single level, but it's standing up for what is right, and that means the health of our community and the health of our people. So I'm coming to you this afternoon asking you to hear us out as it relates to the vaccine arriving in our city, and also ensuring that we as the city are focused on our most vulnerable residents and our frontline and essential workers, and they have started to receive the vaccine, including Dr. Avegno, who did so on last week. She says she's experienced no symptoms, while other colleagues of hers have experienced little or no symptoms or side effects. Now, as soon as I'm available to get it as your mayor, you better believe I'll be right there. Now, I'm waiting on when my time will come, and I will not in any way jump the line because our most vulnerable are the most important. But it's important to remember two things as we discuss the vaccine today. The vaccines are our way out of the pandemic, no doubt about it. We still have a very long way to go, but progress, we can remain steady because we are continuing to see progress in our city. We wanted to leverage our medical experts and our neighborhood engagement office to reach out to our communities to inform them on every level as it relates to this vaccination. So I want to thank neighborhood engagement and, of course, our healthcare experts who are joining us, not only Dr. Avegno, but Dr. Griggs, very important, and even as it relates to those who are in the trenches dealing with our people every day, like CJ. So thank you. We know that our Black and Brown communities are among those who may be the most wary of getting the vaccine, no doubt about it. But that's why we're doing everything possible to get the message out, but to reassure our people that public health will continue to be our top priority, rooted in our most vulnerable folks. So we need you to get educated on this, and we also need you to take the vaccination when it's your time. We are here to give everyone the information they need to better understand the importance of getting vaccinated so we can speed up our journey to that end. So here we will receive an overview of the vaccine development, an explanation of the Moderna Vaccine, phases of the distribution, the vaccine distribution methods. We'll hear personal experiences by Dr. Avegno and CJ, We'll answer some anticipated questions, and also you'll learn about next steps for our community leaders. So right now, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Avegno. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cantrell, for your leadership, for your trust in science and public health. It is the reason why New Orleans, as you said, has crushed the curve over and over again. And we're excited to move into this new phase that will hopefully put this behind us forever. Thank you, Neighborhood Engagement. Thanks to my colleagues, Doc Griggs and CJ Marbley. We're really excited to be here today because we really do believe that this is the beginning of the end. We have a long way to go, but there is light at the tunnel. So before we jump into the details about the COVID-19 vaccines and all the science, I think it's critically important to acknowledge the past and our past history of vaccines. There has been a very long history in this country of both government and healthcare providers mistreating communities, particularly those of color, in the name of science. We all know several examples, Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, and experiments that were done on slaves and Native Americans. There have been many, many awful things done, ostensibly in the name of science. And there persist inequities in our healthcare system, which have been laid to bear in the COVID pandemic. We know that our communities of color, particularly our Black and Hispanic residents, have been more susceptible to contracting COVID, have contracted it, and have been hospitalized and died at higher numbers. So we want to acknowledge that there may be many in our community who are quite skeptical of our healthcare system and skeptical of getting vaccines with very good reason because of the history that's gone before us. What we want to do today is be open and honest and transparent and begin with that acknowledgement, then also begin to build trust. We are going to share with you everything we currently know and also what we don't know very openly. We don't want to bore you with science, but we do want to be as transparent as possible so that you're going to feel comfortable taking the vaccine when it's your turn, and you're going to feel comfortable, we hope, sharing this information with your community. We'll answer your questions straightforwardly and let you know when we don't have an answer because we don't always have all the answers. And this is the beginning of our conversations. We plan to continue this dialogue throughout the process of vaccination and update it so that you are kept informed of the information as we get it. We truly do believe this is our way back to normal life. So let's start off with just a little bit of an overview about what is a vaccine. Vaccines are a piece of a bacteria or a virus, anything that causes disease that stimulates your immune system to produce antibodies. You've heard of antibodies. These are cells in your body that fight off infections and either keep you from getting sick in the first place or help you recover much quicker from being sick if you do contract the disease. Vaccines are different from medications that help you get better because most medications you take during an illness, like a Tylenol or an ibuprofen, just make the symptoms better, but they don't actually target the disease. Many of you have received lots of vaccines throughout your life, starting with childhood, and probably many of you get an annual flu vaccine. I hope you've gotten yours this year. We use the terms vaccine, immunizations, and shots interchangeably. They all mean the same thing. No vaccine has ever been 100% effective. There will always be a few people who, even after getting vaccinated, still get sick, but they generally have a milder course. And we do know that successful vaccines can keep the majority of people from contracting a disease. Just like many other treatments, vaccines can have side effects, and those side effects can affect some people and not others. Many times your arm might hurt when you've received a shot. You might not feel well for a day or two after getting a vaccine. That doesn't mean that the vaccine gave you the disease or there's something wrong with it. what that means is that the vaccine is doing its job and your immune system is working hard to make antibodies and fight off future disease. Now I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague. Oh, wait, nope, excuse me. I'm not going to turn it over. Not just yet. I want to tell you, and CJ will join me as well, just my personal experience with getting the COVID-19 vaccine. As Mayor Cantrell said, I got the vaccine. I was very fortunate by virtue of my work in the emergency department to be one of the first people to get it in New Orleans. So I got it 6 days now. It felt like just any other shot, any flu shot. Actually, it hurt even less than that for me. And I'm really happy to say that I've had no side effects. Several of my colleagues are saying the same thing. I've had a few that have told me that they had a headache for a couple of hours. 1 or 2 of them felt tired and achy for a day, but then they were completely back to normal. For me, getting the vaccine was an incredible honor. And it really caused me to think of those that we've lost for whom the vaccine comes too late. And I felt a real personal sense of responsibility in wanting to get it to protect myself and to hopefully be an example for others. CJ, would you like to share your vaccine story?
Sorry about that. I'm CJ Marbley. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at New Orleans East Hospital. And I got the vaccine on about 6 days ago now. And very similar to Dr. Avegno, I had some mild soreness to my arm on day 1, but no signs and symptoms, no side effects. Since then, I've had many friends and family members check in on me to make sure I was okay. For me, I took the vaccine. I look at it in 3 different levels for myself. So 1, as a Black man and father, 2, as a registered nurse, and 3, as an administrator. As a Black man and a father, I have 5 kids that I'm connected with, that I'm looking out for. I have a wife and many extended family members, and I know that I'm part of their care team and part of their foundation as we move forward in life. And so I had to look at ways that I could protect myself. Just like I would look at ways to keep myself healthy and living a healthy life, I had to look at the vaccine as a way to keep myself healthy and vaccinated to make sure I'm there for my family. As a registered nurse, during the height of the pandemic, I had the opportunity to kind of get back at the bedside some and really interact with patients, respond to critical situations. And I've seen so many of my colleagues not only have to deal with the impact of COVID deaths from their patients, but also be infected themselves. And I knew as a registered nurse that I had to do what I can to protect myself so I can be the caregiver for those people who are in need, and to also protect the patients that I'm interacting with, and protect the staff that I'm interacting with. And then as an administrator, we had the unfortunate situation. We were the first hospital in the state to lose a nurse to COVID-19 back in March. And I would have done anything to have the vaccine for that nurse and not have to have that conversation with her kids to let them know that. And it really rocked our hospital, but we still had staff to come back the next day and work when our census was 4 times the normal amount. So as an administrator, I had to lobby for all my staff to get the information, to feel comfortable getting the vaccine, and really to set an example for them so that they can see that I'm serious about protecting myself, the staff, and the patients here at the New Orleans East Hospital.
Thank you, CJ. I think it's really important to communicate on both a personal and professional level just how meaningful this is, and also to let people understand what it's really like on the ground with our frontline workers and the challenges and the grief that they see every day. And that helps explain, I think, why so many of us are so excited about this, because it gives us a little ray of hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. I did trauma nurses for many years, and I never seen such devastation as I've seen this past 9 months.
Yeah, I think we would all agree, those of us who've seen it firsthand. So thank you for your story, and we will hear from you a little bit more later. I want to get into the science part of it now, which is exciting to me and hopefully will be interesting to everybody else. So just a little bit about how vaccines are developed. These 2 vaccines that are now currently approved, it is true, have been developed, tested, and approved in record time. Traditional vaccine development takes years to complete, and that's generally because things are done one phase after the next, because for a drug company, investing in a vaccine is a very expensive proposition, and they generally don't have the money to do a lot of the steps at the same time. That's different from what's happening now because there is a worldwide need to develop these vaccines. The amount of resources that were available to companies that have been working on this technology for a very long time was so much more than it would have been normally. And so during a public health emergency or an outbreak like this one, the phases of development are done often simultaneously, and you have multiple companies working on the same vaccine. The same steps were followed in exactly the right protocol. They were just done on, once all together rather than one at a time. Once a company develops a vaccine, or a series of companies, then they have to have gone through multiple different phases of trials. So many of you have heard about the clinical trials going on for different vaccines. They were tested in New Orleans. There's some still ongoing in New Orleans. That's where they get thousands and thousands of people and try really hard to match the demographics of the trial participants to the country so that we have a really good, robust, representative sample. That's what was done in order to test the vaccines, both Pfizer, Moderna, and the other ones, to see if they were going to work, if all of the technology that they had been working on, and Dr. Griggs will go into a little bit more about that, if it was actually going to work outside of a lab. Once they had that data and information on thousands of individuals, then that data is all sent to the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA is responsible for approving all vaccines, medications, devices, and tests in the United States. So it does a whole lot more than just vaccines. During emergencies like this one, the FDA also has a standard process that speeds up their approval. They have a standard that says that any vaccine must be at least 50% effective with no life-threatening side effects. The great news about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines is that they were found to be 90% effective, so that's well above their threshold. The FDA doesn't just take what the pharmaceutical companies send it in terms of the trials. It has access to all of the raw data and performs an independent scientific analysis of all the data to make sure that what they're seeing is truly what the pharmaceutical companies were seeing. And again, in this case, what they found completely matched what the pharmaceutical companies' analysis had been as well. After that, there's another layer of approval, and that is a CDC committee called the ACIP, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that is non-governmental, non-partisan science and health professionals that look at all of the evidence and then make national recommendations. So there's multiple different groups all looking at the same data, coming to the same conclusions. And that's just in America. There are countries all over the world doing the very similar steps for approval and are finding the same results. Both Great Britain and Canada have already approved the Pfizer vaccines for use, if they found what we did. So there's a lot of consensus that these vaccines were done properly and are very, very safe. And now I would like to turn it over to my friend, Dr. Griggs, so he can go into a little bit about what exactly are these kinds of vaccines that we have available.
Thank you, Dr. Avegno, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, everyone, for helping out with this. These are truly exciting times. The mRNA vaccine is truly fascinating. So let me put it on a table where everybody can really reach it. If you can remember, and I'm not going to date myself too much, but if I do, oh well. Back before remote controls, when the television station needed to be changed, where no matter where you were, you would have to go ask your mom or dad what channel they wanted, go change the channel, then go back and play. You were messenger RNA. What messenger RNA is, it's the little kid that changes the channel of genetic code. What happens is, and that's what makes this truly fascinating, with traditional vaccines, normally there is an inactivated piece of the virus or the organism that they inject in your body, so you can mount an antibody response and know that when you face it again that your body's ready. Well, all that's off the table. They figured out that they could take the actual virus and move it out of the way, get the genetic code for the virus that was released last January, inject it into our arms, and train your muscles. And it doesn't even go into the nucleus. It goes into the cytoplasm. So basic science. You have your cells. You have this thing that looks like a fist or a gumball, and then it's surrounded by this, like, if there are kids watching, they know what I'm talking about. It looks like slime with a bunch of rocks and stuff in it. Yeah, well, that's called the cytoplasm. Well, the messenger RNA goes inside of the cytoplasm, and it goes to this production crew called the ribosomes. And the ribosomes, well, they're a bunch of bad dudes, right? They make amino acids that are proteins for all different stuff that are needed in the body. Well, this is where it gets really cool, and I know I have slides, and we'll go through that, but I want to lay the table first. The ribosomes make the amino acids, and what they code for, we've all seen, I'll talk about gumball, or we're in New Orleans, right? The snowball-looking thing with the red spikes on it, with the red, yeah. Well, the spikes are what adhere to our cells. Well, this messenger RNA codes for those spikes, and it trains your cells to start making the spikes. So your cells, your muscle cells, these cells where they initially injected, turn into a spike factory. And that's absolutely cool, because once the spikes go out, your body recognizes the spikes as foreign. It's like, hey, that's not supposed to be here. And antibodies form, and they mount a response. Now, this is where it gets fun and interesting, because that's where we've heard us talk about side effects, the sore arms, the muscle aches, a little nausea, maybe, no, not nausea, not this one, but headaches and things like that. Well, that happens. It's the equivalent of football practice. And I know it's too soon, because yesterday was too soon. I won't go there. However, for the next game, typically before a game, there's practice. And what happens is you scout out the other team, and that's what we've done, and you run their plays in your practice. So you're prepared for game day, just like we will be next game and all the way to the Super Bowl. So that's basically what happens is your body mounts an antibody response to its own spikes, to the spikes that you've manufactured just based on that genetic code. And again, this is amazing. It's transformative. It cuts out the middle person. It's more cost effective, and you don't have to worry about, oh, they're injecting me with the virus to make me sick, because you're not. All you're doing is giving you these harmless spikes that your body recognizes as foreign, so when it actually runs into the virus, the body's ready. It's game day. We've run that play before, and we can win. So that's the simple version, the basic version. With the Pfizer vaccine, it's 2 doses. Now, messenger RNA, it's wrapped in fat. They call it a lipid envelope, right? That's so it can go in where it needs to go. It just kind of slides in, slides out, does what it needs to do. And it's also protective of the virus. The Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored at -70 degrees. You keep hearing about all these cold chain, and they use all these jargon, these big words. They need real cold. We're in New Orleans. You need a cold freezer in order to protect and store the virus and store the vaccine. And the refrigerator would last for 5 days. The doses are given typically in your deltoid or your shoulder muscle, and they're taken 3 weeks apart, 21 days apart. That was the first one to come online. And again, it's truly amazing. This is laying the platform, y'all, potentially for vaccines. Instead of taking the time to grow viruses and culture, if we can just get the code, we can, as viruses move, because they change their coats, they always are trying to hang out, we can change up the vaccine based on the codes. The FDA gave our emergency use authorization that Dr. Avegno spoke about earlier on December 11th. And here we are, like the first doses shipped on the 13th, that committee on the 12th, and the hospitals began receiving. And as you know, Dr. Avegno and CJ have already gotten theirs. I'm like a little kid. I want to get mine. Can't wait. This is nothing that was done in haste. Dr. Avegno made a point to talk about there were more resources available than usual. Like I said, they have been researching this technology for decades. But the problem is, they couldn't get it stable enough. Messenger RNA, little kids only going to run back and forth to the TV to change the channel so many times, then they're going to get tired and whine, or they're just going to disappear. Well, what happened is there were so many resources because the entire world was trying to find a solution that not only did we have resources of money, but we had people. We had 44,000 people in a clinical trial, and I've done extensive work in a clinical trial. And let me just tell you, I've worked on certain clinical trials where it's taken 2, 3, 4, 5 years just to get 10 people enrolled, and it just doesn't work. But we're all trying to find a solution. So this is absolutely amazing. The follow-up that's been done, as you can see, it's being done now. CJ and Dr. Avegno are telling you, they know the exact number. Well, no, it's 6 days, 4 hours, 3 minutes, and 36 seconds. And there's tracking technology from the CDC to follow us up afterwards. At the very beginning of this, when I started doing segments, I started saying is what you're seeing is you're seeing behind the curtain of science. This is something that we do all the time. This is not novel. Well, the virus is novel. And this is something unprecedented or seen, but we're not making this up as we go. This is all part of the scientific process. Again, I got to go back to my script. There are 8 slides. There are 8 COVID cases in the vaccine group compared to 162 in the placebo group. Placebo, if y'all want to think about placebo, that's a little salt water, a little sugar water. There's no medicine. There's nothing being investigated in it. My grandma said it was a little sugar water, but it's actually salt. Next slide, please. The Moderna vaccine is very, very similar. The technology is the same. It's still the messenger RNA. It's 2 doses, and it's 28 days apart, 4 weeks apart. It doesn't have to be stored in that cold, that extra cold storage. It can be stored in a regular freezer. It's expected to hit the ground like this week, so we'll have 2 choices. Folks, if you total up the number of people, this is amazing. We've had, in less than a year, we've had almost 75,000 people go through a 10, 15-year process to get this to light this candle at the end of this long tunnel. It's unprecedented, but let me tell you, it's been scrutinized, and it's being scrutinized again and again and again. The same side effects are the ones that you would look for, the headache, fatigue, the joint pain, and the chills, but most importantly is that those typically resolve within 24 hours. In the Moderna vaccine, an interesting thing about Moderna, this company was set up for this vaccine. If you look at the M in the beginning, in the RNA, it's not a Jedi mind trick. It's mRNA, Moderna vaccine. It's very modern, so modern that they put it together for this, and we got it right. And with their trial, they only had 5 cases of COVID-19 in their vaccine group, and 90 in the placebo group, or the sugar or salt water group. Both of these vaccines are 90 to 95% effective, which again is amazing. That's almost unprecedented. Next slide. Now, we talked about side effects. All right, so I gave you the football analogy. Any of us that have either watched the football team, know someone that played, know that the game, you don't really get beat up on game day. You might a little bit, but it's practice where you will feel your muscle aches, your soreness. I used to ask my grandmother for a pack of peas to put on my head or my arm because I'm sore. It's the exact same thing. The vaccine side effects, basically, you're giving your immune system a practice run. And in that practice run, you're going to do everything that you would during a regular game, which means you're going to have inflammation, you're going to have cytokines come out, you're going to have all kinds of things in your immune system activate to try to protect you. Well, you're going to have pain at the injection site because there's a needle in your arm. You might be a little bit tired because your immune system is working while you're trying to go along with your regular day. You're tired because your body's working overtime. You might have a headache because of the swelling. The same thing with the fever, the chills, the joint pain. All these things can be a byproduct of inflammation, but more importantly, a byproduct of your immune system actually working. And here again, folks, unlike what I've heard all these years, oh, you're going to give me, if I get a flu shot, I'm going to get the flu. Well, there's no virus. There's no COVID in this anywhere. There's nothing. So you're not being injected with a virus at all. You just have the code being put in to program and make you a superhero, to make your own spikes and activate your immune system. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Avegno.
Thanks, Dr. Griggs. It's always important to understand the science, but nobody makes it quite as fun as Dr. Griggs does. And so we have to understand how things work, but it's also important that we understand how they're going to be distributed. Just imagine the scale of this on a worldwide stage. We have 8 billion people, all of whom need the vaccine, and the vaccines we have now are 2 doses, so that's 16 billion doses of vaccine that needs to get out as quickly as possible. These companies, one of the great things about having a lot of resources is that they were able to start producing the vaccine as we were waiting for approval. And that's why the day after the FDA approved them, those vaccines were going out the door on trucks. Even then, think of how much capacity and logistics and raw materials it's going to take just to vaccinate everyone in the U.S. with hundreds and hundreds of millions of doses. That's why it's important that we have a priority list of how we distribute. And that's set by the CDC committee I mentioned earlier, and it's really a balance between 3 things. What the science tells us are the highest risk individuals that need this vaccine first in order to protect loss of life and hospitalizations and exposure. Equity, who are those that have been most disproportionately affected by COVID, and how do we ensure that that inequity does not happen when we're talking about vaccine? And then implementation, how are we going to do this appropriately so that it gets to where it's supposed to go? As Doc mentioned, the Pfizer vaccine requires an ultra cold storage. None of us have that just lying around, or, there's not like you can just walk into the appliance store and buy an ultra cold storage. So that's got to be really well thought out, because certainly we don't want to waste that. And so what you see is phase 1A, where we started last week. Those are the first folks to get the vaccine. And it is healthcare workers with direct patient exposure. So those of us who work in ERs, hospitals, ICUs, taking care of patients. And unfortunately, right now, we're seeing just as many patients as we did in previous surges, and in all over the country, much, much more. There is a lot of COVID in our hospitals. There is a lot of risk to our healthcare workers. If our healthcare workers get sick, then hospitals are completely overwhelmed. So that's why those were the first priority. As the Moderna vaccine was approved this weekend, those doses are going out right now on trucks, and they're going to be dedicated to our long-term care facilities, both staff and residents. And that's because we know particularly our nursing home residents have suffered the highest rates of death and hospitalization. It is devastating what has happened to so many of our elders and so many of those in facilities, both residents and staff. So from a science and an equity perspective, it was really important that this group felt that they should get the first doses of vaccine just to stop that loss of life. We found out yesterday, actually hot off the presses, a little bit more about who is in that. And actually, this is I had an updated slide I'll run through with you for phase 1B and 1C. When we have gotten everybody in phase 1A, which is expected to be about 24 million people across the country, so a lot of people, when we have more vaccine available, then we can move to the next priority group. What we know in general is that this group is going to include those over 75, again, because they've suffered the highest rates of illness, hospitalizations, and death. And it's also going to include what they're calling essential frontline workers. And we found out a little bit about who that might be yesterday. It's going to be our first responders, including our police. Our EMS and fire will actually get the vaccine this week. They're included in the healthcare workers group. It will include education personnel, so schools and daycare personnel. It will include folks who work at large manufacturing plants, correctional workers, and food workers, as well as public transit workers. We don't know many more details than that. We do know that the state plans to follow strictly the priorities set by the CDC, and so we'll be following these groups. There is a lot of details to be worked out. The next group after that, and again, we were just finding this out in the last 24 hours, is going to be those over age 65, also hit very hard by the virus, as well as adults who have high-risk conditions, so things like kidney disease, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, other medical problems that have made them suffer more than healthy adults. We also know that other essential workers will be in the next phase. That's a really broad group, and we're still waiting for some clarity. After all of that, after we've gotten through the priority, then likely it will be available to the general public, and those are healthy adults and children. There's still a lot we don't know about the effects of the vaccine in children. The 2 vaccines currently or that have been approved are approved to age 16 and up. We know that both of them are now expanding their trials to at least 12-year-olds, so we'll know more about adolescents. And there are some plans to include younger children in trials in the next month or so. So for right now, we're really talking about general population adults and possibly adolescents. And then again, as we give the vaccine and have more information about the vaccine, it will likely extend to children as well. Realistically, we expect that general public vaccination will not be available until end of spring, early summer 2021. And that's if we can continue smooth logistics as we are hoping for in the next couple of months. So there's a couple of different ways or in places where you might get a vaccine depending on what group you fall in. Certainly if, like me, you are a healthcare worker or an essential worker at a large workplace, maybe a manufacturing plant or others, you might actually get your vaccine from your workplace. Particularly, again, those hospitals and places that have the ability to have very cold freezers and have a system in place that can not only give you the first dose of vaccine, but the second. We call that a closed pod, a single place where everyone associated with that place could get the vaccine. Some folks might get the vaccine by virtue of where they live. Again, a nursing home, a long-term care facility. Those who live in shelters or correctional settings will likely get it where they live. Most of the general public, we estimate, will get it from your healthcare provider, your trusted primary care provider, community clinic, a pharmacy, if you have a home health worker or you go to dialysis. So this should be part of your routine care, just as getting your yearly flu shot or any of your other regular health should be from your provider if you have one. But what we've learned through our experience with COVID testing is that we know we can't afford to leave anybody out, that we have to make this as easy and accessible as possible. And for a lot of people, it's very challenging to maybe get to a primary care provider or a pharmacy, when the vaccine is available. So what we're hopeful and working with the state on is how can we replicate some of our models from community-based testing and have drive-through walk-up sites in neighborhoods that will make it very easy for folks of all stripes to be able to get their vaccine. So we also want to make it easy not just for you to get there, but also to feel like getting the vaccine is no big deal in terms of other things in your life. The federal government has said that there will be no cost to the vaccines, and this was a condition of them giving help and resources to Pfizer and Moderna and others to say, we'll help invest in this, but we're not going to charge the general public. Depending on where you get your vaccine, they might ask for health insurance, but your insurance is not going to be required and you should not be charged for it. A photo identification will not be required, nor do we expect that there will be a proof of pre-existing conditions. If you have diabetes, if you have heart disease, you should not have to prove that you do. Any site that we are working with, if it's a community-based site, the only information that's going to be collected is to keep track of who got what vaccine and when. You're going to get a vaccination card. Some of you are old enough to remember having those for your childhood vaccines like I did. And I have my vaccination card here. That's to show me the day I got it. It's going to remind me what day I need to go back. And I'm going to keep that forever as proof that I was vaccinated in 2020 for the COVID-19 vaccine. So you'll get that as well. If you are contacted, it's because we want you to come back for the second dose. The vaccines are not fully effective after the first dose. And if everybody only gets one dose of these vaccines and forgets to show up for the second, it's going to take us a lot longer to get to the level of immunity that we need. So it's really important. If you get your first dose at one place, you should plan to get your second dose at that same place. If you get your first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, the second dose has to be of the Pfizer vaccine as well, and the same for the others. There are vaccines in development that require only one dose. We hope they'll be available because it will make it a whole lot easier, but they're not yet approved. So I'd like to turn it back over to CJ now to talk a little bit about, a little bit more maybe about why this vaccine is critically important to take the burden off of our healthcare workers, and then what the effect, might have on the patients that we're currently seeing in our hospitals and healthcare settings.
Thank you, Dr. Avegno. So can you hear me okay? Great. So, for healthcare workers and for the frontline workers, they've been in this battle for 9 months now. And I've seen the effects of fatigue, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and just them trying to push through each wave and get patients back to their families. I think it's been a lot on them as far as the weight of having to be the person to hold someone's hand when the family can't be there to visit during their last moments, and having to deal with the battle, not only if, many of them who've been affected by COVID-19, but also their family members, and having to deal with the loss of family members also while they're trying to save their patients. So I think with this vaccine coming, it's been a sign of hope, a sign of a light at the end of the tunnel for many healthcare workers, that we may be able to overcome this and get past this pandemic and really make sure that we're there for the long term for our patients and our families. And also, the other point is it helps in having the people available to take care of these different surges that come through, because many times with each surge we've had where the number of patients have outpaced the number of workers available, and we've had to really recruit extra people, change our care models and go into team models to help handle the surges. And it's really been an impressive work and very respectful work that the healthcare providers have done over these 9 months. But I definitely see the fatigue there on all levels, and I'm starting to hear that sense of hope and relief in their voices now that more and more people are getting vaccinated, and the ability for us to maintain through this recent surge.
Thanks, CJ. That's really important. And I think it's important to highlight that the vaccine is not just for a public health win. Obviously it is, but it's also the key to getting our economy back and running. We need New Orleans to be the safest place to live, to work, and to visit, because that's how everybody gets back to work and the pandemic ends. Once we reach a high level of immunity, and experts are putting that at about 75% of the population needs to be vaccinated in order to have that level of immunity where we can really get back to normal. The quicker we can do that, the quicker we can go back to doing all of the things that we love and feeling really good and safe about doing it. I'm going to have now ask Ms. Valerie to lead us through a little bit of a Q&A. We've compiled some questions that were sent earlier. We know that there's a lot of frequently asked questions, and so we want to make sure that we touch on all of them. And so I think CJ, Doc, will just maybe take some turns answering these as Ms. Valerie asked them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avegno. So let's jump in. Have the vaccines been tested on people with underlying health conditions?
I'll jump in. The answer is absolutely and yes. Again, it was 75,000 people. And in order for a drug, particularly a vaccine, to be rendered effective, you want to test it amongst as many different demographics and groups of people as possible. So the answer is yes. I'll take yes for 25.
What is the risk of side effects and allergic reactions?
Yeah, so I'll start with that, and then maybe CJ, you can, talk a little bit about it from your perspective. As we said, vaccines have side effects. Most of them are very mild. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines did have more than 50% of people who reported side effects. But very, very, very few, if any, were really serious. There were no deaths associated with the vaccine. There were no serious long-term complications or hospitalizations that we know of. Each of them had a few people in their studies that developed Bell's palsy during their vaccine trial. And Bell's palsy is a temporary facial weakness. But it's not clear if that happened because of the vaccine or not, because in a given, several months, lots and lots of people develop Bell's palsy for reasons that we don't really fully understand. So while a lot of folks reported side effects, they were almost all a sore arm, a headache, a little bit of fatigue, a fever, and very, very mild. CJ?
Yeah, and as I talk to my peers here at the hospital and peers across the city and across the country, I've heard the same thing back. Very mild side effects, very mild reactions, mostly local to the site of injection. And we've seen across on regular national news where there be any major reactions. That's been national news. But as I talk to my colleagues in nursing and in medicine across the country, everyone's seeing the same thing. Very mild side effects and really no major allergic reactions at all. We watch everyone for 15 minutes after they receive the vaccine just to make sure they're okay. Then after that, we'll let them go. We're checking in on them.
And if I can just add, CJ, real quick, the allergic reactions, that whole thing, that's not meant for people with food allergies or seasonal allergies. If you've had an anaphylactic reaction before, of course you want to talk about it. But that specifically, that caution is specifically for people that had anaphylactic reactions to medications, injectable medications or vaccines before. And there's a myth that's going around. There's a couple that I've had to deal with. There's a lady in Tennessee that apparently it seemed like she vasovagal. There are people that are prone to pass out at the thought of a needle, people that pass out because of pain. There are people that stand up too quickly and they pass out. And as this thing rolls out and more people get the vaccine, you're going to hear of little things, but it was not proven to be because of the vaccine.
Right.
Thank you so much for that insight. Next question. Should I get the vaccine if I've already had COVID-19?
Yes, is a short answer. We don't know yet how long your natural immunity to COVID-19 will last. And so what the current recommendations are is even if you have it and you know you've had it, if it's been more than 3 months, because it may be that your natural immunity wanes after 3 months, you should still get the vaccine.
As a patient, will I be able to choose which vaccine I receive?
So at present, you got to think for the general population, it'll be anywhere from late spring to early summer. And as things evolve, that might become a possibility. But right now, you take what's available. Last week, before Moderna came online, well, everyone was taking Pfizer that needed to get a vaccine. And now it will depend on your availability. I'm sure Dr. Avegno can speak better to that.
Yes, we hope to have, right now we have 2. As of today, we have 2 vaccines available. We hope to have even more available. So it certainly is going to depend on where you're getting it from. It might be that your primary care provider has one kind but not the other kind. Whichever one you get, if it's a 2-dose, you got to get the same thing. So you can't take the Pfizer first and the Moderna second. So that's why it's really important that you keep your card and you make sure you come back for that second dose so that you can make sure you're getting the full protection.
And most importantly, don't try to double up. Please don't double up. Not necessary. Don't double up.
That's good to know. The next question for you is, will the vaccine be mandatory? Can my employer make me take the vaccine?
Well, that's a good question. And CJ, I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking over at the hospital. Right now, it does not seem that many places, if any, are making it mandatory for this first rollout. However, that is something that is being discussed in workplaces, big and small, all over the country. And it's something that probably will, the legal profession will have an opinion on, maybe more so than the medical profession.
We have not made it mandatory for across our hospitals at LCMC. And what we tried to do is provide people a chance to come and ask questions and get their questions answered and get their concerns addressed, and then give them the information, whether it's from our pharmacist or from some of our chief medical officer, from myself, to give them the information they can to make the best decision for themselves. And so what we found that most of the time that once someone comes and gets all their questions answered, they've been more likely to take it on their own because they see the benefit for themselves. And they've kind of dismissed a lot of the fears.
Thank you for sharing that with us. What information is going to be collected when we go to get this vaccine?
So I'll press my buzzer and press that one because it was in an earlier slide. It's not, none of that is necessary. You won't be charged. You don't have to necessarily have health insurance. They might collect the information. That's a pretty easy one.
Yeah.
Basic demographics.
We are collecting and putting the information to the state immunization platform link to make sure that, just like we do for when your kids get shots at the doctors, mm-hmm. It's the same portal for information that we're collecting.
So I have questions coming in on our Q&A line. What is the difference between emergency authorization and approval when it comes to this?
That's a really great question. In a public health emergency, the FDA uses this, what they call emergency use authorization. So it basically just speeds up the time that the FDA takes to review. They still review that medication, that vaccine, that device with all of the same information and all of the same people. It's just that they focus all of their attention on it, whereas maybe they would do it over a more leisurely period. Because of how dangerous the public health emergency is, they review everything really quickly and they give an emergency use. It is different than in normal times when it would go through a very lengthy review period and they would give for full approval, but it's appropriate for the scale of the disaster. And COVID is not the first time that this has been done, because there have been other medical crises that have necessitated this process. Just because the FDA has given emergency authorization, the data collection and the research and the reporting and the understanding doesn't stop. The Pfizer and Moderna trials are continuing, and they are continuing to follow patients and look for things that they might have missed for 2 years at least. And so the FDA is going to be continuing to review that information. Obviously, should anything change, they would then come out and say it. But it's really emergency authorization appropriate because this is a public health emergency.
Thank you all for the questions that are coming in. Just as a reminder, this particular town hall is specifically about the vaccine. If you have questions about the COVID restrictions, such as they are in the city. We can follow up as neighborhood engagement with that information offline. You all have, we have contact information for those who called in and who sent their information on the text line, and we'll be sure to do that. The next question for our panelists, I am curious about how the general public will find out when they're eligible for the vaccine, and from whom will that information come?
That's a really good question, and we don't have all those details worked out because, again, it was only yesterday when we found out who the second priority group. The state has a really good plan. Every state was supposed to report their plan to the CDC. Louisiana's was actually a really good plan. I know that they hope to lean heavily on your primary care provider. So that would be the first place to start. Your doctor right now is not going to know when they're going to have general population vaccine available, but it's always good to check in with them and say, you know, are you going to email me? Are you going to call me? How will I know if you have it available? Same with pharmacies. Right now, CVS and Walgreens are solely giving vaccine to our nursing home residents and staff. That's what they were contracted to do, but we anticipate that at some point they will get the vaccine for this, just like they have flu vaccine, and so they will likely be communicating that. When we know how it will roll out, we will be doing all kinds of communications outreach. When we start community-based vaccination sites, you will hear about it, and we will let you know. But right now, it's you know, very much a work in progress.
Is there any specific guidance around what employers are obligated to do at this point?
Not yet, but I imagine there will be. Or, you know, perhaps industry specific. CJ, maybe you have better insight.
No, I think I agree with you that it'll be more industry specific, and I think those will come down from the federal or state levels.
Mm-hmm.
And a question from Habitat for Humanity, and their question centers around, can their staff come as a batch? They're a nonprofit who has retail space, construction, community work. Will an entity be able to come to a vaccination site as a whole?
So the answer is maybe, but it really is going to depend. If you can imagine the logistics to make that happen for every particular work site is challenging. You know, in talking to nonprofits, I've encouraged them to kind of band together, and maybe it's a coalition of nonprofits that could all work together to become a site. Or to have, you know, a relationship with a provider or with a pharmacy that could then come out and vaccinate everybody. So if you're maybe a small nonprofit, it might make sense to talk to others like you and see if there's strength in numbers. Again, we still don't know quite yet how that's going to work out because that priority list hasn't been set yet.
So one last question for you, and the others we will follow up on. You can always go to ready.nola.gov if you have questions, and to get the most updated information about COVID, the vaccine, and all things emergency related. Final question, is there any guarantee that I will not be a carrier of this illness after I get the vaccine?
Take it away, Doc.
Yeah, so interestingly, you know, at the very beginning of this, we came out and said any doctor or any healthcare professional or public health professional that is not going to tell you, I don't know, then you should run away because we're all finding all of this stuff out together. We can't guarantee that. There is no guarantee, and we don't know. There's a lot of things you're hearing Dr. Avegno and CJ say that, look, we just hot off the press, we found it out yesterday. There's conferences happening all the time, and time will tell, and we promise to be fully honest with you about it throughout the process.
Yeah, what we do know in these trials is that, you know, people who got COVID were far more likely to be in the placebo group but they were all symptomatic. We don't know if there were people who had asymptomatic cases and then could transmit it to others who had gotten the vaccine. So all I know right now is by getting my vaccine, I'm going to be protected from severe disease. I don't know yet if that's going to protect my family from getting it if I happen to pick it up. What we've seen with other vaccines is, yes, it's very likely that even if I did contract COVID, I wouldn't have any symptoms and I'd be less likely to pass it on. But we don't know that for sure yet. That's why I'm still wearing a mask. CJ's still wearing a mask. We're still socially distancing. We're avoiding physical gatherings. We're doing all the same things this week we did 2 weeks ago because we don't know yet about transmission.
Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate the insight, answers, and time that our panelists have put in today, and all of our residents for joining us this afternoon. Mayor Cantrell, if you would like to close us out.
Thank you, Valerie. I just wanted to thank again the Office of Neighborhood Engagement, Dr. Avegno, CJ, Dr. Griggs, for your time, for all of some good information, answering the questions, being very honest about what we know and what we do not know, but at the same time encouraging our people, all of our residents, to continue to follow the guidelines. Wear that mask, keep your distance, and avoid large gatherings, and do not let your guard down. So we still have a ways to go, but it is exciting to know that the vaccine is here. And it's also, I know that I'm very proud of our residents. I'm proud of our city for leading in this space through this pandemic from the very start. So we should be proud of that and not let anyone distract us. Let's remain focused, because the health of our community is at stake, and we have proven that we can put our people first. So I just encourage you, and I thank you. And as I started, I wish you, and I continue to wish you and your family a very happy holiday season. Stay blessed, and please stay safe.
Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.